All right, Shabbos, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank Zecharya and Sora Wolasky for dedicating Orishim and Joshos this month in the zechus of refuah sheleima for their grandsons Zecharya Dov ben Perel Shira, Shaindy and Avraham Kelman in memory of their beloved parents and in the zechus of all those who need a refuah sheleima. Dr. Linda Weinberg, in loving memory of her husband, Dr. Paul Weinberg, Paris Moshe ben Avraham David, Selma Woolf, with immense gratitude to Hashem, and with Teffilos for health for all in the new year. Leah Sol is a zechus for refuah sheleima for her daughter Ilana bas Esther, and for all those in need of yeshuos. We thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Chef Schwartz, in appreciation for the Daf Yomi shir, and Valeriy Osipov as a zechus for refuah sheleima for Irina Bas Brilliant, who is having brain surgery today at 12 o'clock p.m. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, the surgery is successful, and she, together with Kol Cholis, will have a complete and enduring refuah. We'll say we have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. A lot to do today, and not a lot of time. That seems to be the story of our shir. So we'll say today's daf is Mem Zayin 47. We are picking up on Mem Vav Amud Beis 46b, 23 lines up from the bottom. Yeah, that's right. 23 lines up from the bottom. All right, so remember again, we left off the entryway to the sugi that we are currently engaged in, was the situation of what happens if one goes ahead and is mekadesh his sister. One gives Kiddushin money to one's sister. So obviously Kiddushin is not tofsin with the sister. What's the status of the money? So the machlok is Rav and Shmuel. Rav says the money is returned back to the brother, and Shmuel says that it is a gift. It's a gift. And I will say, interestingly enough, everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, a person knows that he can't marry his sister. Right? Everyone knows that. So then the question just is, ultimately, again, why is one giving that money to his sister? So again, remember, Rav said he's giving it as a pikadon. He's giving it as, he wants his sister to watch it, but his sister's going to refuse it, so he drives Kiddushin. Shmuel says he wants to give her a gift. But at the end of the day, again, she might be embarrassed to accept the gift. This is the way to get her to accept the gift. So I will say, the Gemara then brought up the case of going ahead and giving challah from flour. Remember, again, you don't give challah from flour, you give challah from dough. So what's the halacha, ultimately, again, if you give a coin flour as challah? So interestingly enough, the Gemara said if you did that, the coin has to give it back. And if he holds on to it, it's gezel. So the Gemara says, well, this is where we're picking up. So the Gemara says, "V'tehevi truma v'lo socha ad sheyotzi alech halim mokom achar." I don't understand. So why not say like this? So we'll say, so again, I'm not going to go through all of the steps of the previous steps of the Gemara. The Gemara says like this: let the kohen hold on to the challah. Let him hold on. I shouldn't say challah. Let him hold on to the flour. Let him have the flour. Let it be considered like truma. In other words, let it be consecrated for the kohen. And then the Yisrael is going to have an obligation to still separate out more challah. Now what the Gemara is bothered by is, why does the kohen have to give him back? Just let him hold on to it and let the obligation to re-separate challah be on the Yisrael. To which the Gemara says, Milo Tzan, do we not learn Mira Nakav Shino Nakov, Truma Velo Socha, Achiyotzi La Truma Umasir Makom Achar. Most of the time, this memory again we've had in every Masechta, it comes up in one way or another. Otzitz Nakov, Otzitz Sheino Nakov. A perforated flower pot, a non-perforated flower pot. So a perforated flower pot is considered to be attached to the ground. Non-perforated is not attached to the ground. So what happens if halacha l'maisa, a person goes ahead and separates out truma from the produce in the non-perforated pot for the produce that's in the perforated pot? They will say, now obviously it doesn't work. That doesn't work because one is potter, right? One batch of produce is potter, one batch of produce is chayiv. So if you did this, the Gemara says, what's the halacha? Truma. What you separated is called truma. But you have an obligation to separate out truma from another source as well. So in other words, why not employ that same logic here as well and just let the kohen keep the flour, let it be designated ultimately again as truma, and let the obligation upon the kohen be, let the obligation upon the Yisrael be to separate out challah again, to which the Gemara says, betray mini tzos, bechad mana lo tzos. People will listen to you to retithe when you're dealing with two entities. In other words, in this case, with the perforated flower pot, the non-perforated flower pot, a person could hear, okay, I tithe from an exempt batch on an obligated batch. So with two different entities, people will listen. With one entity, people won't listen. In other words, the Yisrael is not going to listen to re-tithe the same dough again, or the same flour again. The other possibility is the Olam Kohen makes us tzayis. So the other possibility is another Kohen would listen. V'kasaver balabayis niskina isasal ba'asi l'michla b'tivla. Shabbos say the other possibility is, you know what the issue over here is? When you go ahead and you give the Kohen flour as his challah, you know what the problem is? The problem is not the Kohen. The problem is the Yisrael. See, the Yisrael now thinks that he has satisfied his tithing obligation. Right? The Yisrael thinks he's done his job. He's now able to eat his dough because he's separated out challah. Turns out he hasn't separated out challah. And what? And what? He's going to consume tevel. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. We just said before, everyone knows that you can't separate out challah from flour. Yodeh ve'en yodeh. People know and they don't know. Yodeh she'en mafrishin challah kemach. People know that really you can't separate out challah from flour. Ve'en yodeh. But what don't they know? The Sora Wolasky. If you ask a person, ask a stam person, why can't you separate out challah from flour? What will they answer you? Mishum tircha de kohen. Because it's, as they say, it's a krich, right? It's difficult for the Kohen. It's difficult for the Kohen that ultimately the Kohen is going to get flour, then he has to bake it off. So they think, in reality, the reason you can't separate out challah from flour is because it makes the Kohen's life too difficult. Tircha the Kohen kabla. But if the Kohen accepts flour, then what happens? If he accepts the flour, that means he accepts what? The tircha as well. The tircha as well. So therefore, again, as much as people know you can't separate out challah from flour, they think it's because of tircha for the Kohen. If the Kohen accepts it, then he's effectively accepted the tircha, in which case it should be good. So again, why not go ahead and say that halacha l'maisa, let the flour, instead of causing the Kohen to have to return the flour, why not go ahead and just say, Kohen, you could keep it. It's called truma, and ultimately, again, make the Yisrael obligated to retake challah again. After all, it's the same question we asked before. Milot Tznan, did we not learn? Mishe'ino nakov ala nakov. Again, if you tithe produce from a non-perforated flour pot onto produce from a perforated pot, so what's the halacha? Yachs truma, what you separated is truma, the yachzer v'yitrom, but you have to tithe again. So to which the Gemara says, so again, using this logic, we should say the flour should remain quote-unquote truma. Let the Kohen go ahead and keep the flour, and halacha l'maisa cause the Yisrael to retithe again. Haokimna betray money tzos bechad manalot tzos. Well, this is exactly what we said before. When it comes to two utensils, a person will listen because they'll recognize that, again, I tithe from one batch on another batch and it's not good. When it's one entity, like we're dealing over here with the Kohen, a person is not going to listen to go ahead and retithe. For lo tzos, is that true? Vatzman, we learned, hatorim kishos, so we'll say, so listen to this. Hatorim kishos, v'nimtza mara. We'll say, listen to this. I'm tithing cucumbers. And it turns out that some of the cucumbers, that which I separated out as truma, is bitter. In other words, the produce is not good. Avatiach, or I'm tithing melons, v'nim says saruach. And with one of the melons, or some of the melons that I used, that I designated as truma, turns out that what? They're spoiled. So what's the halacha? Truma. That which you separated is still truma. V'nim v'yachzer v'yitrom. But you have to tithe again to go ahead and have appropriate produce. So we'll say, now, what do you see? What's the point? What do you see from here? You see from here that when you engage in an ineffective tithing process, that which you have tithed is still considered, it still has the status of the particular truma, right, or the particular tithe, but you have to go back and do it again. And I will say, based on this logic, remember, let's loop this back around. We will say, what do we have over here? We have a case of a guy giving flour as challah to a Kohen. Can you give flour to a challah? I'm sorry. Can you give flour as challah to a Kohen? No. What do you have to give? Dough. So again, the Brisa said, Kohen, got to give back. If you don't, it's gezel. Why? Just let the Kohen keep it. Let the tithing, so to speak, be semi-effective. Let him keep it. And Yisrael, you have to retithe. That's what's happening over here. So what's this fascinating? Gemara says it's not a good raya. Why? Shaindy and Avraham Kelman. This is not a good example. Why? Because technically speaking, when you go ahead and you tithe, even if you separate out spoiled produce, technically speaking, your act of tithing is a valid one. It's a valid act of tithing. Mid Rabbi Eloi, Dam Rabbi Eloi, Minayin the Torah Minara Aliyah Fashet Truma So Truma. How do you know that even if you went ahead and you separated out inferior produce or compromised produce as Truma for superior produce, that it works? Literally again, do not bear any iniquity, do not bear any sin when you go ahead and you separate out your Truma. Obviously, what is the Torah talking about over here? The Torah is talking about don't separate out inferior produce as truma, because right, it'll be sinful if you do. And I will say something's only sinful if what? If the act is effective, right? If the act of it is ineffective, in other words, if separating out inferior produce as truma doesn't work, right? Doesn't result in a truma designation, then what? That is not sinful because I didn't do anything. The fact that it's sinful indicates that my act is actually effective. So I'll say ultimately again, so from here you see that halacha l'maisa, if one in fact separates out inferior produce as a tithe for superior produce, then halacha l'maisa it works. So I will say, so bottom line over here. So interestingly enough, what's the halacha? The way that Rambam paskins is that if you go ahead and you separate out challah, ultimately again from flour and give it to the kohen must return it. The kohen must return it. Now I will say, now the reason why this case of challah is different, even though there are other cases where even if you make an ineffective designation of truma, for example, that the kohen keeps it and you have to retithe it. The reason why I do this, I will say, is because by challah there's a real concern that if the Yisrael thinks that his batch of dough that he's going to make is as they say, challah has been taken, that's a real issue. It could also be a potential issue by the kohen as well. So since there's a potential double issue over here, if you gave challah from flour, kohen must give it back, and ultimately to show that it's an ineffective removal of challah. Incredible. What about the case of giving money to your sister? What happens if a man goes ahead and is mekadesh, quote unquote, is mekadesh his sister? What happens with that money? So once again, the Rambam paskins that halacha l'maisa, like Shmuel, that it's matana. Interesting, it's matana, right? Because a person knows that he can't be mekadesh his sister. The pikadon case, I guess, is a little bit more too far fetched for the Rambam to accept. So therefore, the Rambam accepts that halacha l'maisa, that money has the status of a matana, and therefore the sister need not return it. Incredible. Amar Rava. Let's go back there. Lo shanu, top of Memzayin. Lo shanu. And I will say, and I remember again, we're going back now to our Mishnah. Specifically, the third statement of the Mishnah. What was the third statement of the Mishnah? Remember, what was the Mishnah? Reuven is being mekadesh Rachel with what? Dates. So we had two cases in the Mishnah, right? So case number one in the Mishnah was hiskachili bezu, right? Oh, that case only works if what? If one of those dates is independently worth a pruta, right? Case number two was hiskachili bezu. Then what's the halacha? Collective pruta from all of the dates. What was the third case in Mishnah? Third case in Mishnah is she's eating the dates as they come in. So the Mishnah said in that situation, what's the halacha? One of them has to be worth a pruta, and it sounds like from the Gemara, really the last one has to be a pruta. Otherwise, you're getting into a situation of mekadesh b'milva, of being mekadesh woman with a loan. So now here we go. So Rava said lo shanu. I will say now, this idea that we said before, that if she's eating the dates as they come in, that the dates do not combine to form a shava pruta. That's only true. Ela da'amar la bizu ubizu. Right? That's what I was saying, where again, there's still some level of independent lashon with this one. Aval, amar la be'elu, but if he said to her, become mikudeshes mi be'elu with these dates, then what's Rabbi saying? Then halacha l'maisa ochlos nami. I'm sorry, afilu ochlos nami mikudeshes. Even if she's eating them as they come in, she's mikudeshes. Why? Because ki ka'achla midinav shakachan. Rabbi saying, I remember it again. When we said before, bizu. What was the problem if she's eating them? What's the problem? The problem, as Rabbi say, is remember the Kiddushin is not really chal until when? Till the last date. If it's not chal to the last date, that means that the previous dates are all a halva. If he, however, says be'elu, then I will say be'elu means all of the dates from the beginning are the Kiddushin, so to say. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Aval be'elu. Well, first of all, he says, Rashi says, I'll look at the previous Rashi. Ela da amrla bezu ubezu ubezu. To lo gamri kiddushin v'lo nikna la ad nesina achrona shi gemar diburo. Remember, the Kiddushin is not effective until the last date is given. However, Rashi says, Be'elu mikabelas harishona, mikabelas harishona, lo ba'asa liyada b'toras milveh, v'chi shenigmar dibar hikna la b'toras Kiddushin, v'chi achla medida ka'achla, v'afilu achla rishon mikudeshes, imish b'kulon shavar pruta. I will say, when he says Be'elu, so effectively, again, remember, what he's doing is he's giving all of them over to her as a unit. So because of that, as long as they combine together to form a pruta, even if she's eating them even if she's eating them as they come in, halach l'maisa the Kiddushin works, and it's not called ava. Tanya kavase de Rabba. So there's a brayz that supports Rabba. So it's a very interesting distinction. Hiskachili ba'alon berimon be'egos. Become a kudesh estimate will say alon is an acorn, rimon is a pomegranate, egos is a nut. I say become a kudesh estimate with these items. Osha amrla hiskachili be'elu. Or if he says to her, become a kudesh estimate with these, imyesh pekulon shave pruta mikudeshas. If collectively, if collectively it's worth a pruta, then ultimately again she's mikudeshas. Ve'im lav, and if not, in mikudeshas, she's not mikudeshas. Bezu ubezu ubezu. What happens if he says with this one, this one, this one? Imyesh pekulon shave pruta mikudeshas. If ultimately again collectively there is a pruta, then she's mikudeshas. Ve'im lav in mikudeshas. Fine. Bizu, not loss, right? If he says become a kudesh with this one, and not loss of achla, so she took it and she ate it, and bizu, that he says become a kudesh with this, she not loss of achla, so she took it and she ate it, va'od bizu, and with this one, va'od bizu, eina mikudeshes ad shehei ba'achas mehen shaveh pruta. Ultimately, again, she's not mikudeshes until one of them is a shaveh pruta. Fine. So now the Gemara says, what's this case? Hai ba'alon berimon be'egos heichi dami. We'll say, what is the case over here of the acorn, the pomegranate, and the nut? So ilema da amrla o ba'alon o berimon o be'egos. So if he said to her, become mikudeshes to me either with the acorn, with the pomegranate, or with the nut, then I will say, then in yesh bekulon sheva pruta mikudeshes, it can't be that could be a din in collective value. That's v'ha o kamar. In other words, we'll say, if you say o, then what's going to be the halacha? How is she mikudeshes? Only if what? Only if one of them is worth a pruta independently. So what's the case? Ve'ela ba'alon uberimon ube'egos. So also rather it must be a case of where he's saying become mikudeshes to me with all of these things. All of these things. And then we'll say if it's all of them, then what? Then as long as collectively they are worth a pruta, we are good to go. But if that's the case, hainu bizu, ubizu. But also then that's the same case as zu, ubizu. It's the same case. Ella, lav da amar lahu be'elu. Rather, I will say it must be that one of the cases is where she says elu. Now, where he says elu. Now I will say, interestingly enough, what's going to be the distinction between zu, ubizu, and elu? They sound like the same thing. So remember again, the nafkamina case will be when she's eating the items as they come in. If it's zu ubizu, then he has in mind ultimately again that the Kiddushin is not really complete until the last item is given, which means if she's consuming them as they're coming in, the items that she's consuming has the status of a halva, not Kiddushin. If, however, he says be'elu makes all of them a unit. If it's a unit, then halacha l'maisa, there's no halva. Everything from the beginning, ultimately, again, is part of that unit of Kesef Kiddushin. To which the Gemara says, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but that's the decision. Hamid diktani seifa, o sha'amala iskachili be'elu. But at the end of the brayse it says, he says to her, become mikudeshnu with these items. Michlal dereisha lav be'elu askina. Sounds like the Reisha is not talking about elu. To which the Gemara says, you're right, perushe kamefarish. We'll say the second part of the right, one part of the brayse is coming to explain the other part. Here we go. Hiskachli ba'alon berimon be'egos. If a man says to him, become mikudeshes to me with an acorn, a pomegranate or a nut, ketzad, what's the case? So we'll say, so that's the case, right? The case is becoming kudesh to me with these items. Now the Gemara says ketzad. Okay, so what are the mechanics of what we're talking about over here? Kigon da'amarla, his kachili be'elu. The case is where he says to her, become kudesh to me with these items. I vikatoni seifa bezu The Katani Seifa, listen to this. Then the Brisa comes along and says like this: for Katani Seifa, Bizu, not lasa v'achlaso, right? If he says to her, ultimately again Bizu, so Bizu, and in that case, not lasa v'achlaso, if she's taking the items and eating it as they come in yesh ba'achas men shavar pruta mikudeshas, ve'im lav, ina mikudeshas. So I can't remember. So this is the distinction we made before. If he's saying Bizu, ubizu, now remember, on one hand, what's the benefit of saying bizu? What's the benefit? Combines, right? In other words, all you need in a typical case is for it to have a combined value of a shava pruta, right? Where's the potential challenge in that case? If she's eating it as it comes in. Because if she's eating it, as it comes in, then what do you need? Then you need one of the items to be worth a pruta, right? Because again, since she's consuming it, and the earlier items have the status of a halva, and as you saw in yesterday's daf, you cannot be mekadesh with a halva. We're going to come back to that idea a little bit today as well. So therefore, in order for it to work, one of the items, either the egos, the rimon, or the alone, have to be worth a pruta. On the other hand, v'ilu reisha, right? The Gemara says, v'im lavin v'ilu reisha, lo kamaflik beno chelas l'manachas. But yet the reisha doesn't make a distinction between whether or not you're eating it or you're leaving it. Why is that? Shmamina kol heicha da'amrla be'elu ki ka'achla minafsha ka'achla shmamina. Bose, what do you see from here? You see from here, Bose, a fascinating distinction between saying be'elu and bizu. So essentially, what we have over here is really three different cases, right? Case number one is where you're saying, become mikudeshes to me with this, become mikudeshes to me with this, become mikudeshes to me with this. So now it turns out that's the easiest case. Why? Because what happens in that case, Rabbi? In order for that case to affect Kiddushin, what has to happen? One of them has to be a shavar pruta. And the truth is, in that situation, we don't care if you're eating it or not eating it. It makes no difference because one of those items now. The intriguing case will be, okay, let's go case number two. Bizu. What's going to be the halacha? Combined. So I will say, so as long as halacha l'maisa, the combination of all the items being given is worth a pruta, then halacha l'maisa she's mikudeshes. What's the wrinkle in that case? The wrinkle in that case is if as she's receiving the items, she's eating them. Then I will say, what's going to be the halacha in that case? What's going to be the halacha then? Then you go back to needing one of the items to be independently worth a pruta. Why? Because Rabbi say the way it works in bizu is when is the Kiddushin complete? When is the Kiddushin complete? Only after the giving of the last item, which means what's the status of the earlier items being given? Halva, a loan. She's consuming the loan items as they come in. They're no longer extant. If they're no longer extant, then the might say again, they can't be used for Kiddushin. So therefore, it only works effectively if one of the items being given is independently worth a pruta. However, now we're introduced to a third category. Third category is a man is going to be giving a woman a number of items. In this case, again, alone, rimon, egos. And he says, Hiskachili be'elu. Oh. So I said, what does be'elu do? Be'elu makes them into one cohesive unit. So like be'elu is like a modified and elevated bizu. Because like bizu, be'elu says, what do you need? Combined pruta. Unlike bizu, it's not a halva. What elu says is from the beginning, this is a unit of Kiddushin. I just happen to be giving you the unit of Kiddushin in three stages, the alon, the rimon, and the egos. But Lamaisa, even if she consumes it as it comes in, as long as the collective value of all the items being given is a pruta, we are good to go. Fascinating case. The Gemara says, Hani Klaman Damar, Aseifakai. Going back, all of this makes sense. Going back to our Mishnah, if you say the case of her eating the items modifies the second case of bizu in the Mishnah. However, then one of the Mishnah said, this is yesterday's daf. And what did it mean in the Mishnah when it said until one of the items has a pruta? Until the last item being given is worth a pruta. So to you see over here as well, that in the case of bizu, really when we say until it's a pruta, it really means the last item being given, if she's consuming it, the last item being given has to be a shavar pruta. Al Rabbi Shmuel Da'amri Tarvayu Areshakai. But according to Rabbi Shmuel, who said that's what? That in the Mishnah, the case of Ochelas modifies the Reisha. modifies the Reisha, hiskachili bezu, hiskachili bezu, hiskachili bezu, then ultimately, I'm sorry. El Rabbi Shmuel Darmi Tarvayo Areisha Kai Va'ocheles Istrichale Hacha Klali Kachashe Prati Lo Kachashe. We're talking about general cases, not specific cases. To which the Gemara says, no. Hamani Rebbehi Damar Loshna Kizayis Veloshna Kizayis Ukizayis. Prata. Rabbi says we have to reflect the view ultimately again of Rebbe, right? And Rebbe holds that halacha l'maisa that Rabbi, we're not going to get into this case. Rashi has an arichos over here. Where Rashi explains actually talking about pigul, where a kohen has multiple machshavas, multiple intentions to go ahead and eat pigul or make something pigul by having again a disqualifying thought when offering up the carbon. And Rebbe says it makes no difference if you use lashon of kizayis or kizayis. Ukizayis. Okay, so that's the way we would explain it according to Rabbi Shmuel. Both say for our purposes, halacha l'maisa, how do we come out of this? So it turns out for our purposes we actually have three cases, like we just said before. Case number one, everyone's going to agree. Well, not everyone, but in the case of hiskachli bezu, both say what's the halacha? Let's just get this clear. What's the halacha? Ultimately, one of them has to go ahead and be worth a pruta. Both say, by the way, in general, whose opinion is that reflective of? Remember, the Gemara identified that as Rabbi Shimon. That's Rabbi Shimon by shvuah, right? A guy who's making an oath, ultimately, that he doesn't owe any money to 5 people. If he makes one general oath and he lies, there's one liability. Makes 5 independent oaths, ultimately 5 independent statements of liability. So I'll say that's case number 1. Case number 2, bizu. Then what's the beauty in that case? All the items combined pruta. And I will say, however, if she's eating it as it comes in a case of bizu, it only works if what? If the last one is worth a pruta. Now I will say, it turns out it's not just if one, but the last one has to be worth a pruta. Why? Because otherwise, again, everything before that everything before the last item being given has the status of a halva. And you cannot be mekadesh and bayah with a halva. However, now again, I've also introduced to the third case. If you say it's kachili be'elu, becoming Kiddushin with these items, then what? Then that is a unit. And halacha l'maisa, as long as combined, they are worth a pruta. Even if she's eating it as it comes in, Kiddushin works. So we'll say it's important to... Actually, let's do this now. So we'll say first wide line. I was going to talk about Kiddushin Milva. Let's talk about it now. Amarab, Hamakadish Milva, Eina Mikudeshas. We'll say if a man... Let's go back to the core over here. This is a core discussion. If a man is Makadish with a Milva. So we'll say, so again, the Gemara doesn't tell us what case of halva we're talking about. We'll say, technically speaking, there are 2 different ways to be Makadish with a halva. Right? Up until now, what we've been focusing on is like this. Ruvain lent Rachel $1,000. Okay? Now Ruvain says to Rachel, become Mikudesh with the halva, which would essentially mean what? Loan forgiveness. Right? Right? Loan forgiveness. Right? That was from Mr. Schoenfeld. Right? Loan forgiveness. Right? Right? So let's say, listen to this. So that's the typical case. Then, of course, there is another case of Kiddushin and Milva, which is what? Right? Ruvain loaned Shimon $1,000. And Ruvain essentially assigns the loan to Rachel. Right? And says, Rachel, right, become Mikudesh to me with this loan that is now payable to you. So, the Gemara is not making it clear which case we're talking about over here. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Anyway, why? And we'll say, let's just go with case number 1, which is Ruvain lent Rachel money, and ultimately, again, is now forgiving the debt. So again, it's not Mikudeshas. Why? Mivolot Tzadnitna. And I will say, now again, we're getting to the core, to the kishkas of this sugya, which is very exciting. I will say, what does it mean, Mivolot Tzadnitna? What that means is, when Ruvain lends Rachel money, I will say, who is the owner of that money? Who is the owner of it? Rachel. So therefore, it's interesting that when Ruvain forgives the debt, he has not given Rachel anything. Right? She is the owner of that money. I shouldn't have to pay it back. Okay. Just have to pay it back. But at that moment right now, he's not giving her anything. That is her money. That's what's called milvalot sunnet. I will say, now, by the way, the way that manifests itself, look at Rashi for just a moment. It's the second wide line in Rashi. It's really important. Rashi says, Halo ve'rashay lotzia b'hotza ve'eno chayav la'amida be'iska shetei mitsuya b'chol eis shitavenu. Listen to this. Here's what does it mean, Milvalot Nitna, right? So when Rachel receives that money from Reuven, Rabosai, so again, what restrictions does she have on that money? What restrictions does she have on it? So Bepashtos, none. She does, right? There's no limitation as to how she has to invest it. There's no limitation as to how, obviously, you could create a restricted loan, right? But Lamaisa, a typical loan, a typical hava is Reuven's giving Rachel money. It's her money. It's her money. And it doesn't have to be readily available for repayment, right? She could do whatever she wants. Because she could do whatever she wants with that money, Lamaisa, in the eyes of halacha, that is considered hers. And therefore, when he quote-unquote forgives the debt, he's not giving her something that didn't already belong to her. It's quite fascinating. To which the Gemara says, "Kimnema ketenoi." So the Gemara says, "Machlokes tenoi." Hamekadish milva ein mikudeshes. So I will say, if a man is mekadish woman with a milva, she's not mikudeshes. V'yish omer mikudeshes. Some say she is mikudeshes. Wow, machlokes. So my love balcom eflagis. Also, maybe they're arguing about the following point. The Mar Saver milva lo tzar nitna. This is so interesting. Maybe they're arguing about the very essence of a loan. They will say, what is a loan halacha? Maybe one opinion says, when you receive loan money, it's yours. Do with it as you want. That's one opinion. Other opinion says, no, not true. Maybe halacha says, or will say that when you receive loan money, in other words, we'll say, I can't use it for whatever I want. I have to invest it responsibly or use it responsibly, because at the end of the day, I have to repay that debt. So maybe I will say, again, there's machlokes as to how to use loan money, and that machlokes manifests itself as to whether or not loan forgiveness is an effective vehicle for Kiddushin. To which the Gemara says, 1 second, V'tizbara, Imosef, look at the Seifa, V'shavim, B'mecher shezekana. I will say, interestingly enough, everyone agrees, however, that with a regular purchase, loan forgiveness works. So I'll say, so just to show you this for just a second, Reuven lent Rachel $1,000. Think about Kiddushin right now. Reuven lent Rachel $1,000. So Rachel owes Reuven $1,000. So now what happens? Reuven wants to go ahead, Reuven wants to purchase a car, right, from Rachel. So now the cost of the car is $1,000. So what could Reuven say? Rachel, keep the loan. And everyone agrees that works. Interesting. Everyone agrees that by Mecher, Rashi says over here, in Machar, right? Everyone agrees that by Mecher, ultimately, again, it works. Actually, that wasn't right to Rashi. It's not good cover to Rashi to say you're going to read Rashi and then I read it. Look at Rashi. V'shavim Mecher, im Machar lo karka shenikna bekesef, im amar la milva sheyesh la alecha yehelach b'shvil ha-Mechar, v'nisratza lo kana lo kech im yeshna be'en. So as it's halacha l'maisa. Now Rashi adds in over here, im yeshna be'en, if the money is extant. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But l'maisa, loan forgiveness does work to affect a regular sale transaction. To which the Gemara says, now 1 second. Now, if you hold that loan money really belongs to the borrower, then how ultimately, again, is Rachel able to acquire the money as the purchase price for the car? To which the Gemara says, Amrav Nachman, Huna Chavrin Mokim La. Bemili Achari. So we'll say Bemili Achari. So listen to this. So Huna, our friend, ultimately establishes this in a different way. What are we dealing with over here? His kachili b'mana. Now we'll say, what's the case over here? The case over here is not Kiddushin b'halva. That's not the case. He's not being Mekadesh with a loan. How is he being Mekadesh? Watch this. He says to her, become Mekudesh with a mana. And he gives her a mana. And what happens? V'nimtza mana chaser dinar. She counts it. She counts it, right? I don't know, in front of him, not in front of him, right? But she counts it, and it turns out it's not a mana. There's a dinar, which is a relatively small amount of money that's missing. So it says, now what's the status of the Kiddushin? So Mar Savar Ksif Alei Milsa Lemitvei. So one says she's going to be too embarrassed to ask him for the money, but the Kiddushin is not valid because she's not committing herself to that. He told her she's getting a mana. She didn't get a mana, but she's going to be too embarrassed to say anything, and therefore again a Kiddushin is not good. Umar Sarah Loki Sefer Muslim. The other opinion says no. Why should she be embarrassed? Right? Why should she be embarrassed? Lamaisa, she'll ask him. The Kiddushin is going to be valid. I will say, and now he owes her a dinar. Right? He owes her a dinar. Right? And therefore halacha lamaisa. I'm sure that's way too late. Why is that alarm going on at 6:30 in the morning? What is that for Sundays? It better be for Sundays. Let's say, okay. Oof. So listen to that. I'll say, I have a little jealous of that. I'll say, so I'll say, so now the shaila is over here, that halacha l'maisa, it's missing a dinar. So first opinion is going to say, she's going to be too embarrassed ultimately to go ahead and ask him for that money, and therefore the Kiddushin is not good. Second opinion will say that halacha l'maisa, no, she'll ask him for the money, and we'll say, so that's called Kiddushin ba'ava. Why? Because now she commits herself to the Kiddushin, but he owes her a dinar. That's the case of Kiddushin ba'alva. Ve'ela hada am Rabbi Elazar. His kashli b'mana v'nasan dinar. If he says to become a Kiddush with a mana, and he gives her a dinar. So we'll say, so in this case over here, let's say he says, become a Kiddush with $100, and he gives her $1 bill. He gives her $1. What's the halacha? Reis mikudeshes v'yashlim. She's mikudeshes, but he owes her $99. So we'll say, you see from here that's what? That Allah Chamais, woman doesn't have a problem collecting whatever outstanding money. Is this statement only effective according to one opinion? No. Amri, mana chasar dinik seifalei muslim mitvei. Mana chasar tisha v'tisha lok seifalei muslim mitvei. We'll say, it's interesting. There's only the element of embarrassment when it comes to the collection of a relatively small amount of money. We'll say, if you can imagine, if he said to become a Kiddush with $100, and he gives her $99. So there's an element to say, is she going to go back to him for $1? So that's where there's the concern is. But if he says becoming Kiddush with $100 and he gives her $1, there's no embarrassment there because it's clearly understood that he owes her the rest of the money. So that would be a case. Well, so interesting. The way the Gemara is understanding it now is that the case ultimately of going ahead and the case of collecting, the case of being mekadosh woman with a halva is not what we thought before of loan forgiveness, but it's rather ultimately again because everyone agrees you can't mekadosh woman with halva. It's the case of where you're mekadosh woman with money, and then it turns out the amount of money you promised is not there. There's something missing. So the shaila is the kiddushin valid or not? That's the machlokes. And specifically, when's the machlokes case? When there's a relatively small amount of money that's missing. One opinion says no, she'll ask him for it, and Allah L'maisa, the outstanding money is going to be considered halva. Second opinion will say no, Allah L'maisa, she's too embarrassed, and she's not going to commit herself to the kiddushin. Incredible. And I will say in this case, Reuven has a deposit. Reuven deposited something with Rachel. So he says to her, listen, you keep the deposit, become mikudeshes to me with the item. So I'll say, what happens? And then she goes to look for it, and it turns out that what? The pikadon was lost or was stolen. If there's at least a pruta of it left, then mikudeshes. She's mikudeshes ve'imlav in a mikudeshes, but if not, she's not mikudeshes. Ubemilva, when it comes to halva, af apishlo nishtayir heimena shaver pruta mikudeshes. And I will say that interestingly enough, if by halva, if again sounds like he's forgiving a loan, and let's say none of the, even as long as there's at least a pruta of the money left, ultimately again she's mikudeshes. Okay. Rabbi Shmuel says Mishur Rabbi Meir milva on the days loan harehu kipikadon. But say a loan is no different than a pikadon. Otherwise, I will say so just like ultimately again by a pikadon, if there is a pruta of the pikadon left, good. If there's not a pruta of the pikadon left, Kiddushin won't work. Same thing by a halva. So the Gemara says, "Ad kan lo pligi el demar saver milva afakav lo nishtayir hemena shaver pruta umar saver nishtayir hemena shaver pruta in ve'ilo nishtayir hemena shaver pruta lo." Shabbos say sounds like the machlokas. Shabbos say is whether or not you need a shaver pruta of the loan to be in existence at the time of the kiddushin. Aval dekuli alma mekadosh mikudeshes. Shabbos say what's strange about this is it seems to be that at least in this iteration of the machlokas, everyone agrees. Shabbos say everyone is agreeing that you could affect kiddushin with a halva. Everyone is agreeing. What they're arguing about is, how much of the loan do you need to be left, right? How much of the loan has to exist? But Allah L'maisa, everyone seems to be agreeing that you can be Mekadosh Milva. What's going on over here? I will say, how do we start this whole sugya? How is that you can't be Mekadosh with the Milva? Why do you assume that this Bryce is correct? It's mistaken. I was say, what a profound statement. In other words, we'll say, Rabbi is saying, who says that this is right? Perhaps this in reality is a corrupted text. So the Gemara says, 1 second. So therefore, Rav is suggesting, you're right. This whole thing about being Mekadosh with a halva doesn't work. It does not work. So the Gemara says, "Hi pikadon hechi dami." So we'll say, let's focus for a second on the pikadon case, right? So in the pikadon case, Reuven had deposited something with Rachel. He says to her now, you know that pikadon I gave you, keep it as Kiddushin. Keep it, and that should affect Kiddushin. So what's the halacha? If she goes back and now she sees that the pikadon was stolen or was lost, so we'll say, is she mikudeshes? Is she mikudeshes? What does it depend on? What does it depend on? Is there at least a shava pruta of the pikadon left? As long as the shava pruta of the pikadon left, we're good to go. So let's analyze this. Hi pikadon hechi dami. Either kabel aleach rayis hayu milvan. I will say, now if it's a pikadon where she accepted responsibility, what does responsibility mean? That if something happened to it, she has to pay it back. So then I will say, essentially, that has the same status as a halva, right? As a loan. If she did not accept any achrayas on it, if that's the case, then when the Seifa said that by a loan, even if there was nothing left of it, she was mikudeshes, niflog v'nisne b'didei. Instead of getting into a case of halva, why not instead distinguish within the cases ultimately of pikadon and write the following: when is this so that she can be Kiddushin with halva? Sorry, with a pikadon. So the Gemara says, shelo kibla le'achrayis. That's only when can you be Kiddushin with a pikadon, Abosai? If it's a pikadon that she doesn't have responsibility for, then as long as there is a shava pruta worth of the pikadon left over, she can be mikudeshes with that. Aval kibla le'achrayis. But if she accepted achrayis on the pikadon, afa pishalonish dayer himena shava pruta mikudeshes. Now we'll say, if halacha l'maisa she was makabel, she accepted achrayis, then I will say that means she is responsible for that. If that's the case, even if there is not a pruta of the pikadon left over, still pikadon forgiveness should create kiddushin. Why? Because ultimately, again, she's no longer on the hook. Elo taratzaki. This I have to explain. So here we go. B'milva afa pishne shtar hemena shavar pruta elu mikudeshes. I will say. Let's go. So now we're getting back to what we said before, right? We took a little bit of a circuitous journey with halva. We'll say you can't be mekadesh a woman with a halva. Now, we'll remember again. I've always said before, you could remember when we were talking about before, talking about a very specific case. I'm in a case of a man who is being mekadesh a woman with a specific amount of money. He gives her money. It turns out that what? That the whole amount wasn't there. Okay, in that case, I will say then, assuming that you feel that you hold that the woman is going to go after him for the rest of the money, halach l'maisa, that rest of the money becomes halva, she can become mikudeshes with that. That's a different kind of case. But in a typical case, where Reuven lent Rachel money, and now through loan forgiveness, he wants to mikadesh her, everyone agrees, doesn't work. Again, even if there's some of the original loan money left over, we'll say, watch this. Reuven lends Rachel $1,000, right? He says, Rachel, any of that original money still around? She says, yes, actually, again, there's a $100 bill from the original stack of money you give me. It's on my dining room table. Reuven says, Rachel, become mikudeshes with that money. Again, Rabbi said, the Gemara is suggesting even now, that doesn't work. Now that's an interesting chiddush. Why? Because I will say that's the original loan money. Right? It hasn't been spent. The Gemara seems to say now, even if some of the original loan money is still there, doesn't make a difference. You can be mekayishim with a halva. Why? Again, why not? Milva l'otsan nitna, because loan money becomes the property of who? Of the borrower, and therefore Reuven is not giving Rachel anything new. Okay, now watch this. Rabbi Shimon Elazar Omer, Shremer Milva Harik Kadon. Rabbi Shimon Elazar said in Rabbi says no, Hava is just like a pikadon. I will say meaning what? That the same way by pikadon, as long as there is at least a pruta's worth of the pikadon left over, you can be mekadesh with that. Halva, as long as there is a pruta worth of the halva left over, you can be mekadesh with that as well. So I might come and figure. So what are they arguing about? This is fascinating. Amar Rabba, Ashkechasinu l'Rabbanon bebei Rav, Diasi v'Ka'amri. Both say, here we go. What are they arguing? So we'll say, so it turns out there is a machlokes. This whole time we were taking it for granted. You can't be mekadesh with the halva. Apparently it's a machlokes. Now, again, the opinion that says that you can be mekadesh with the halva, I will say, says that what? That's assuming that what? That there is a pruta of the halva left over, so to speak. So what's the machlokes? So this is fascinating. The Gemara, what's the machlokes? B'milva b'rishus bailim lechazara who adin la'onsin kamiflagi. We'll say they are arguing about the following idea. How do we view loan money? How do we view loan money? Is loan money considered to be in the rishus of the bailim, of the lender? Right? For chazara. In other words, we'll say, I'll give you a perfect example. Reuven lends $1,000 to Rachel. Right? Gives her the money. Rachel has not done anything with the money yet. Could Reuven call the loan back? Could he call the loan back? In other words, before the money has been spent, everyone is used. Can Reuven call the loan back? And I will say the corollary to that is vodin la'onsin. If something happens to the money before it is spent, ultimately, again, who has responsibility if something happened to the money? Demar savar milvel birshos lo v'kaima vodin la'onsin. One opinion will say no. We'll say as soon as the lender gives the borrower the money, who owns that money? Who owns it? Right, the borrower. Even if the borrower has not done anything with it, the borrower is the owner of that money, and as the owner of the money, if something happens to the money, who's responsible for it? The borrower. Mar savar milva b'rishus bailim kaima. Another opinion says no. We'll say that halacha is actually fascinating. That is not the case. In fact, the halacha is that before the money has been spent, right, that money still belongs to the lender. Right? It's in the borrower's hand. Obviously, if it's in the lender's hand, then it's his money. Right? The chiddush over here is lender has given the borrower money, so borrower's holding a stack of cash. Let's say before, because the concept of milva l'hotzah nitna means when you spend it, it becomes yours. But while that money is extended, while the original loan money is in existence, that loan money belongs to the borrower. And therefore, again, the borrower could call the loan back. You could call the loan. That's the olcha. But the corollary to that is, if something happens to the money, who's responsible for it? Ultimately, again, the lender as well. So fascinating machlokes. But we'll say, take a look. Let's go right there. So we'll say, one second. But I said to that, la'onsim, no. We'll say, it can't be like that. For onsim, in other words, we'll say, once the lender gives the borrower the money, it doesn't make sense that the lender would be responsible if something happens to the money. I will say, you can't have a situation like that where an item is in someone else's possession, but yet the owner of the item is responsible for ownership. It doesn't make sense. So therefore, again, so it comes along, so he explains, so he says, I said about this, that ultimately, again, once the money is given over to the lender is, to the borrower is responsible for all onsim. Right? We'll say, ultimately, again, what's the reason? Logara misheila, because this is no different than borrowing an item. So we'll say, like when you borrow an item. So when a person is a shol, a borrower, so again, halacha l'maisi borrows the item, he has to give it back to the owner intact, and he's chayv for onsim. So we'll say, so obviously everyone's going to agree that as soon as the lender gives the borrower the money, the borrower is responsible for onsim, for anything that happens to the money. What's the machlokes? So we'll say, what's the machlokes? Before the money has been spent. So in other words, lenders giving the money to borrower. Borrower's holding a stack of cash. Does the lender have the ability to call the loan back? That's the machlokes. One opinion says yes, because as long as the borrower has not spent the money, lender has the ability to call it. Another opinion says no. Once it's been given over to the borrower, that's it. It becomes the possession of the borrower. But again, in terms of own sin, everyone's going to agree that it's the responsibility of the borrower. Milva bershus bailam lechazara ikebenaya. So we'll say here it is. So what's the machlokes? So we'll say the machlokes is when you have loan money in the possession of the borrower, right? Does the lender have the ability to call the loan or not? We learned. We'll say that's what. And we'll say we'll have to. We'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up with this sugya tomorrow. Here we'll say tremendous sugya. We'll stop here. Shkoyach. Do they need help with? What time are they davening? What time are they davening?
7:30 and 3 p.m.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to help make a shiva house for Elizabeth, the father of Elizabeth Green, there's a shiva house at 7509 Labyrinth Road. It's at 7:30 a.m. and then mincha at 3 p.m.
warm was yours?